Hey everybody, Professor Benelou here with the second of 3 videos discussing Unit 2 discussion board. In this short video, I will go over the first of the 3 topic choices you can choose from to discuss in your Unit 2 DB. The topics I will be going over in this short video will be the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War protests. Okay, so here we go. Bay of Pigs invasion, let me give you just a little bit of a background information on the Bay of Pigs. Basically, Fidel Castro had come to power in January of 1959, bringing with him a communist government that was adverse to the United States. The plan for the Bay of Pigs invasion actually had been formulated during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, our 34th, President of the United States. But President Eisenhower, his administration, and the CIA had hatched this plot too late in his presidency to actually put it into motion. So President John F. Kennedy, our 35th President of the United States, inherited this plan when he became president in January of 1961. So basically, the CIA was training Cuban exiles. And what the plan was the exiles were to invade Cuba at a place called the Bay of Pigs, area known as the Bay of Pigs. And once that invasion occurred, it was hoped and assumed that the Cuban citizens would rise up with the exiles and oust Castro from power. Okay, that didn't exactly happen. Also, the U.S. government had promised the Cuban exiles 2 airstrikes. Well, after the first airstrike, the involvement of the U.S. government was obvious. So President Kennedy canceled the second of the 2 airstrikes, and that was devastating. Okay, that was absolutely devastating. About 1,200 exiles were taken prisoner and approximately 100 were killed. This was a complete fiasco. Kennedy eventually negotiated the release of the imprisoned exiles. Like I said, complete fiasco. It was really bad. But anyway, okay. A lot of people mix up the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Don't do that. The Bay of Pigs invasion occurred in April of 1961, and the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred in October of 1962, about a year and a half later. Okay, October of 1962, military surveillance planes, U.S. military surveillance planes, photographed nuclear missile sites being constructed in Cuba by the Soviet Union. The Kennedy administration had 2 choices in regards to responding. Firstly, order an invasion of Cuba, which a year and a half after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, maybe not so much. The second choice, place a naval blockade against Cuba. The Kennedy administration chose to place a naval blockade against Cuba because it was feared that an invasion of Cuba would lead to intervention by the Soviet Union. Negotiations during the Cuban Missile Crisis, lasted a very tense 13 days. It was the closest the United States has ever been to nuclear war. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of President Kennedy, wrote of his experience as a Kennedy cabinet member during the crisis within his famous book, 13 Days. 13 Days was also famously turned into a movie. The Soviets ended up removing their missiles from Cuba in exchange for the U.S. promise not to invade Cuba. What was not disclosed to the American public until fairly recently is the fact that while we agreed not to invade Cuba if the Soviets removed their missiles from Cuba, the U.S. agreed to remove their missiles from Greece and Turkey as part of the negotiations to end the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oh, and the primary document that you'll be analyzing in the Cuban Missile Crisis is, in fact, a YouTube video of President Kennedy addressing the nation regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oh, and let me just go back to the Bay of Pigs real quick. Let me discuss that with you in the sense that the primary document that you will be analyzing for the Bay of Pigs is a letter written by Richard N. Goodwin. Richard N. Goodwin was an advisor to President Kennedy, And this is Richard Goodwin's letter to President Kennedy advising him on the Bay of Pigs invasion. Okay, so just a heads up with that. And like I said, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the primary document is a YouTube video of President Kennedy addressing the nation regarding the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, the third and final topic I'm going to go over in this short video is the Vietnam War protests. This is a speech, the primary document that you will be analyzing is a speech that John Kerry gave in front of Congress, April 23rd, 1971. At the time, Kerry was a returning Vietnam veteran. Okay, he served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy in Vietnam from 1966 to 1970. He eventually would serve as U.S. Senator from Massachusetts from 1985 to 2013, and he was the Democratic Party nominee, for president in the 2004 election. He ended his political career before his retirement by serving as President Obama's Secretary of State from 2013 to 2017. Okay, Kerry was very disillusioned by his service in Vietnam, and this led him to join the group called Vietnam Veterans Against the War. This group was formed in 1967 and consisted of Vietnam veterans who were now against the war. And he gave the speech that you will read if you engage in this topic before a congressional committee in April 23rd, 1971. Okay, so those are the first three topics. This ends video number 2. In the next video, we will be going over the women's rights movement topic, the Chicano rights movement topic, and the Black Power topic. All right, see you in a little bit.